Hey everybody, Comic Crack here with my part of the All-Star Superman, Look at All-Star Superman 12-part series that Sleepy Reader 666 organized. I've been assigned by a teacher issue 2, which is called Superman's Forbidden Room. I don't have the single issues, I have the graphic novels. So, because in 6 or 2007 when this came out, it was completely off my radar. I think even at that time I probably, because my comic reading and collecting has been kind of ups and downs, that was, I believe, in a time where I wasn't even reading much, let alone collecting things, and even when I was, Superman was never really on my radar, so to speak. As far as my interest in him as a character went, I think he suffered, for me myself, he suffered the same thing that Captain America did, kind of encompassing this ideal of like an American, you know, like I think in my mind a lot of those characters especially kind of stood for this sort of ideal of what like an American was supposed to be and what America was supposed to be. And I'm not saying that that was right in any regards, it's just I think that's what my outlook was. And then over the years, obviously getting back heavily into comics in the last few years, I've been really following more. My perspective has shifted, as I think it does with anybody, and it's definitely helped by series like this that quite honestly just absolutely surprised me and blew me away when I first read it. Also, I think the fact of, I'm sure it would have been phenomenal following it when it was coming out month after month or whatever the schedule was. I think it was a little bit of an erratic schedule when it came out. I'm sure that was a mind-blowing way to do it, but when I got these 2 volumes, I pretty much sat down and read them from beginning to end over a couple of days, you know what I mean? So a really cool way to kind of digest the whole thing. And overall, I guess we'll just start with kind of my overall feeling about it was that it's one of the better stories I've read, regardless of character. As a lot of people are, I think I'm hot and cold when it comes to Grant Morrison. I do like his take on a lot of things, and I do feel he brings an interesting perspective sometimes. Does it get a little overly complex, and does it get a little too far ahead of itself as far as self-congratulatory kind of nonsense sometimes? Sure, absolutely does, but when he hits the mark, he fucking nails it. And Frank Quitely, I really, really like as an artist. So I think those 2 things together really work to create an amazing story about a character that, especially with this story, achieves another level of mythology, of godlike qualities, of all these things that, as much as it's nice to identify with characters we read about, there's a couple of personality traits that we definitely can identify with as a human being and as a reader, but it really takes this character, I think, to a completely different realm in like the god status and things, like makes you realize a little more what exactly this character can achieve when he not only sets his mind to it, but just naturally what he can achieve and what that would mean, you know. So just a quick, I'm sure it's been covered and I'm sure it'll be covered again. I really haven't been around to kind of follow the previous video and just kind of the introduction video to see what people have been talking about as far as the story. I don't want to go into too much detail about the story overall. I really want to keep it focused on my issue, but I do want to say the one thing that attracted me to it was I think just comes down to this image. And I know that Grant Morrison cites this as like the image that really encapsulates his whole thoughts about his take on Superman. I know that the All-Star line was something that was out of continuity. These creators could take these characters and not have to worry about keeping them in line with what was going on in the regular continuity. They had free reign to kind of take the characters wherever they wanted. And I believe the story goes that he was at a comic convention with somebody, and it was later at night, and they were outside, I believe, or looking outside from his hotel window. I can't remember which it was, but basically saw somebody from the comic convention dressed up as Superman, just, I think, either just relaxing, like walking down the road, or taking a moment to sit and just soak everything in, and just looked really like at peace and calm with everything, and just had a really nice day. And I think that idea sparked something in his head as far as like, if this guy really did exist, if nothing could hurt him, if he had all these powers and all this capability, he would be one zen motherfucker. He would be just completely chilled out and relaxed and letting things happen. So in the first chapter, it's found out that he's going to die, and his exposure, as he starts finding out a little bit more in this story, in that it's increased all sorts of his powers, including the moment where Lois Lane hits him with the kryptonite ray, and it actually tickles him and doesn't do any damage to him. He finds ways like that he's become even more invulnerable to things that even used to hurt him, and really stop his heart, so to speak. So I've read the story a few times, the entire thing, but for this particular assignment, I keep saying assignment, it's not like it's a chore, but for this particular series, I guess, my contribution, I wanted to just read the issue that I had been assigned and try to, obviously I can't completely wipe away the whole story itself, but just really focus, don't get carried away with all the other parts of it, and really just focus my attention on that one particular issue, and really try to make this about how I feel this issue stands out amongst the rest, both on its own and how it kind of works as, you know, we're still right in the beginnings of the story. We're still in like a lot of setup. We're still in a lot of discovery before it kind of gets into the meat of it. So how it works in that regard too. So, and then I'll talk a little bit about the art, and I also want to touch a little bit on the animated version. I don't want to go too much into that, but I do have some thoughts about that as well. So why don't we just start with Superman has decided he's, you know, this I think is the part of the story where we as readers and human beings can relate to. He's coming to terms with the fact that, okay, he's gonna die. Now, I mean, for a character like this, it's even more impactful, I imagine, because before that, it's basically like, I'm going to live forever, to, holy shit, I actually have a mortality, you know, like I actually have an end that's coming, and coming to terms with that and all that sort of thing. So we kind of reach the end of the issue where he decides, I'm going to tell Lois that Clark Kent is Superman and vice versa, or Superman is Clark Kent, rather, I guess is maybe more appropriate. And we get we start to get a real taste of that, or at least I did anyway, with him really coming to terms with, this is just the way that it is. Now there's things I want to achieve. There's things I want to do. There's discoveries I want to make. There's this kind of shrine, this mausoleum that I want to have as a, how does he word it? Sorry, here. I guess a time capsule, yeah. He's come to terms with that he's not going to be around. So for example, Superman's forbidden room, like the actual room in the Fortress of Solitude there. I like the way he speaks about it. The fortress isn't a museum, Lois, it's a time capsule. One day some future man or woman will open that door with that key. when they do, I want them to know how it felt to live at the dawn of the age of superheroes. He really wants to leave something behind that kind of speaks to not only who he was, but what the time was like, period. You know, what he was living in, like what was around while he was around. And I find that really interesting, and I get a sense of that throughout the whole story. And I guess it's also where, I mean, I guess you can't talk about something like that without talking about Quitely's portrayal of things like that. Like, there's just a Superman just kind of probably what anybody would do if talking about their death and what's left behind, like just kind of staring off, and just kind of, he seems at peace with it to me, you know. And it's really portrayed nicely by Quitely, as he kind of not only allows Lois into his fortress and into his world and into his secrets, he also just kind of, even in there, goes about his business, as far as, you know, feeding his little baby sun eater, looking in on his robots who are creating something secretive, preparing a traditional feast for Lois, just everything, trying to make her feel comfortable, and you start to realize the scope of what he can achieve and what he's capable of. And I really like that side of it. And the future, and communicating with the future Superman, and kind of checking in and knowing, and I guess that's the other side of it too, that not only does he know that he has a time, but he also has this added bonus of being able to see what the future is going to bring, which maybe helps him deal with it, you know, as far as that goes. And I think throughout the whole thing, he's just treated so perfectly to some degree. I guess there's the worry that it could kind of be so subdued that it becomes this, it draws attention to itself, how subdued he is. But I don't find that really happens. It's just kind of, it's natural. They don't focus on every moment. He chooses to talk about specific moments throughout this 12 issues. So it's not overpowering, you know. So then I guess we come to, the issue that I would have, and again, like in the grand scheme of the book, it's a minor issue, but when I'm focusing just on the single part two, it's something that definitely stood out to me this time. Lois's automatic, and I mean, I know that, I understand that she has this history of inquisitiveness and a reporter, and she's tried to prove that Clark was Superman in the past, and it's always come up that she was wrong. So now when he finally tells her, she totally writes it off as bullshit, and she's very skeptical of it, and her mind just naturally goes to things like, how is this possible? I never saw this before. If he is lying to me, why would he lie to me? Why would he tell me this? Like, what's the gag almost? You know what I mean? What's the point? And just disbelief in general. And why are you telling me now? And so her skepticism is played up, and rightfully so. I think her skepticism is pretty heavy-handed. Even before she discovers the room where it turns out he's making the suit so she can experience being a superhuman for 24 hours. A gas is released, and that induces paranoia. So that heightens her experience. Even before that time, I find that it's pretty heavy, as far as maybe it's a little too much tipped the other way, her skepticism. And I completely understand her being skeptical. I just found it a little too much. I wish there was a little more skepticism met with excitement to be brought into this world, regardless of how it's come about. And then once the kind of gas hits and the paranoia sets in, completely understandable. Then is when she really spirals out of control, and I enjoyed that as well. Again, it really was, the whole issue really was Lois's coming to terms with this secret, and instinctively knowing that there's something wrong, and then Superman kind of taking this moment of like, how the hell am I going to tell this woman? I brought her out here and I've told her my secret because I'm gonna die, you know what I mean? So him trying to come to terms with that, even though he seems kind of like he's accepted it, it's still that hurdle of grasping it as a reality or whatever. So as far as setup and things go, I think it's really successful. Again, this is the issue number 2 out of 12. So we're still in a lot of like, not backstory really, but still setup. We're still setting up what's to come. And when I've read the whole series, because I read it this way, just kind of all the way through, it never stood out as much, because I knew it was kind of like a small part of what's leading us down a path. But when I look at it as a standalone issue, those things kind of do get to me a little bit, for sure. So the other thing I wanted to touch on was, I made a video about it before, and it's a common thing, but I mean, I don't deny that I do like artists of all kinds, but I definitely do have soft spots and interest in artists who portray women in a certain kind of, not quite pin-up-y way, but yeah, I mean, there's no dancing around it. I like art that revolve around women, and I think that quietly, even with a panel like that with Lois showering, is phenomenal, and his drawing of her is incredible. I think she looks really great in this. And even among that, to kind of tie into that art, and it especially happens with her when she starts to get a little more manic and she's running through the fortress to kind of search for things and peeking around corners and stuff. I mean, just look at her positioning in those 2 panels. The movement that's in those panels is amazing, and it really stands out because I wish I had an example for you here. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I have noticed sometimes in reading some newer comics, going through, and it really does seem like here's the static shot here, here's the static shot there, here's the static shot there, and it's just these moments that are frozen where people have stopped, whereas Quietly is capturing a moment where she's in full motion and she's in full kind of freak out mode and trying to figure shit out and searching and what's in that fucking room and what's this future guy, and I'm scared for my life, and now I've found this kryptonite laser, and I'm gonna run and I'm gonna finally take care of this problem and I'll get to the bottom of all this, and running around corners and with such fucking energy that it blows me away. And again, seriously, come on, that's a sexy drawn Lois Lane. Let's just forget about that right now. But I love that about his art, and the thing that also about his art that I feel works really well in the comics are, let me see if I can find an example of what I'm talking about. There's a lot of, like on this page, where as far as backgrounds, sorry if that's not in shot there, the backgrounds are colors and solid and with maybe a couple of lines to suggest that it's a wall or a corner of a building, or in later issues when they're downtown, a couple of windows signifying that it's a building there. It's not really littered with people, it's not littered with activity. I really like that style in the comic book, as far as it almost presents it as like a stage play. Like, here's our actors in this set, and here's the story. You know, it makes it really about like this story that you're being told. It really makes it about these characters, as opposed to anything like a Jeff Darrow, where everything is just dense. I think it would get lost. I think the story would get lost in a kind of denser environment. This really helps kind of focus it on these characters and what we're talking about. Now, obviously that doesn't happen throughout the whole book. There are other moments like that, but for the most part, I do really enjoy the backgrounds that there's not a hell of a lot going on in them. So there's nothing really to distract you, you know, even these pages. Like, obviously there's some to suggest rooms and things, but for the most part, it's just colors and walls and hallways and things, which of course it would be. It's not like the Fortress of Solitude is littered with people buying groceries and stuff, but, and that's something that was going to lead me to the animated version, and that's something that in the animated version stood out because they tried to mimic his style the best they could. They did an okay job of it. They did a much better job mimicking Darwyn Cooke's style when they did New Frontiers. For this one, they got it, sort of, but what they did do for the animated movie was take that kind of background idea and implement it in the movie. Now in the animation, I think it completely didn't work. I don't know why that is. Probably, well, maybe I do know why. Maybe it's because in the animated version you physically see people moving through this world, and it's just this suspension of disbelief that there's constantly nothing going on around them is maybe harder to take in when it's a moving image, where if it's this, like these snapshots, it's easier to suggest it being like this presentation, and it's easier to kind of swallow it overall. So yeah, I mean, I think those are my thoughts, and again, like, it might not be the strongest of the 12 issues, but I think it does what it should, and does it fairly well. I mean, just introduces the idea that now Lois knows. Superman still doesn't quite know how to tell her, which is another completely human thing too. Like, how would you break news like that to somebody? And then it leads into a beautiful issue where she gets to experience his superhuman powers for 24 hours, and they kind of share in this moment together, which will be the next review. I think in 2 days, I think was the schedule, right? So Wednesday. Sorry that I don't remember the order of people. I don't have it written down. I'm sure on Damien's site he's got, on his video announcing it, I think he had a schedule in the description box. I'll try to find out and put it in the description box here too of who's coming up next. So yeah, I mean, as a part of a whole, I think it works well when you just kind of keep reading through it. On its own, it might not be the strongest thing, but it's such a minor thing in what's really truly an incredible book with an incredible look at a character that I personally never thought I would have any interest in, and I love when that happens. I really love when I can be proven wrong in something like that, where it's not about the character, it's about the perspective of the writer and what he's doing with that character and what situation he's going to throw it in, and just how he presents this character. And that image again is just the one to me that just makes sense, especially when you compare it to a piece of shit like the newest Superman movie that just wants to present him as this dark character and have all these violent things and possibly kill somebody, and it doesn't work with this guy. I don't think that kind of portrayal works with this guy. I think this type of portrayal fucking nails it. Really nails it, just as this caring being who just wants the best and just wants the best for everybody. It's a really touching story. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. And please feel free to leave comments, and we'll talk to you all soon.